Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Infirmary, where it is my job to try to debunk myths and help people out there in the endurance world race faster, race happier, and find a path to self-actualization. And because of that, I couldn't have a better guest today. Old friend Cody Beals, who is a Canadian professional triathlete. He's a 4-time Ironman and an 8-time 70.3 and Challenge Half champion. Cody is known for his openness and transparency, sharing an insider's view of pro triathlon from training to tech to finance to mental health and more. He was one of the first gay professional triathletes to come out in public and continues to be an advocate for LGBTQ people everywhere in sport and out. After dabbling in skiing, swimming, and running as a teenager, Cody found his way to triathlon. He competed as a runner and triathlete through high school and university, although academics always took center stage. It's one of the reasons why we're friends. He immersed himself in his studies at Queen's University, envisioning a career in research and finding little time for racing, and then came to realize that endurance sports, like his familiar academic sphere, rewarded deliberate practice even more than natural ability. Cody graduated top of his class, but by then his growing obsession with triathlon rivaled his passion for science. Following graduation, Cody worked as a consultant in environmental science while continuing to pursue triathlon. He self-coached himself in 2014, his debut season, applying an analytical, data-driven approach, and had a breakthrough year that year. Cody Beals, welcome to the Infirmary.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's good to catch up with you again, man. It's been too long. I think it's been like 4 years since we've had a proper chat.
It's true. I disappeared a little bit after 2021. It's been a bit of a journey. So this show today, comes out of a post that I saw kind of flit across my social media sphere a couple of months ago, right after Ironman Chattanooga. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read the caption, and then we're going to go from
Go
there.
for it.
Awesome. So you said, quote, "The cruel beauty of Iron Man is that there's no hiding. Your deepest vulnerabilities will be laid bare. I've pushed myself to the brink of burnout and beyond these past few years, and I found the end of my rope in Chattanooga. Triathlon has been a positive force for my physical and mental health for most of my life, but for too long, training and racing have felt like violence against my body and mind. Excitement and drive have given way to exhaustion and dread. Still, I stubbornly kept at it. I've been chasing a storybook ending to my 12-year career across 4 continents this season. I'm painfully accepting that it may never come, no matter how relentlessly I quest for it. It's obvious now that the measure of my last act shouldn't be some singular performance. When the dust settles, I hope to feel nothing but gratitude for such a privileged career. I'm going to take some time off, work on my old house in my head, and ponder the way forward. Part of me burns for one last season armed with a fresh mindset. Thank you to everyone who's kept me in the game." So other than just a beautifully written piece of prose, I saw that and I can really empathize with what you're feeling, even though my results were never sort of similar to yours. And what I wanted to talk to you today was about pushing, something that probably a lot of triathletes have an inclination towards, resting and taking breaks. But first of all, you put that post up about 7 weeks ago. And what has this break been like? And what are you feeling almost 2 months into it?
I can certainly say I'm in a really different place than when I wrote that, Chris. I was really deep in my feelings then. I was pretty profoundly fucked up when I wrote that. I had just driven myself back like 13 hours from Chattanooga after DNFing at the start of the run. And yeah, I was not very well. I was wrestling with a lot of things. And I thought my triathlon career was over. And it wasn't the first time I thought that.
Mhm.
And so left with no other options, I just accepted I was going to take a break. And at first, I didn't know how the heck to do that. And then I started to realize I think at the root of a lot of these problems and the burnout I was feeling was like this pathological inability to rest, which I think a lot of other endurance athletes can relate to. Like I started swimming as a 9-year-old kid, and pretty much from then on, I just launched myself headlong into one thing after another. Like if it wasn't sports, it was school and then work and then pro triathlon and then renovating my 130-year-old house. There was always something going on. And then I hit 35 and I was like, shit, I've never really taken a proper break in my entire career. Even once I learned, I mean, there were whole years that went by where I didn't take a day off swimming, biking, or running. But even once I stopped doing that, my so-called downtime would still be like rewiring my house or, building a studio in the backyard, like not restful activities, right?
Hmm.
So a couple weeks into that break, I accepted like I need to teach myself how to rest.
That definitely anticipates one of my later questions, which was like, what has your relationship with rest been like in the course of your career? And like, what does it usually look like at the end of a season for you? Have you been able to take breaks at the ends of seasons? Like, what in the past have you done for the end of a season break?
It's been really different every year. And part of that was just due to aging and development. But I think a much bigger part of what changed was, my relationship with the sport and my acceptance of rest. So earlier in my career, I would call at the end of my season, take a day or two off, and then start training again immediately. Maybe with a little less structure, but pretty much just as hard. And it was just like this compulsive addiction to exercise. Like I was just completely unable to take time off. I would feel so screwed up if I took even a day off, like a physiological addiction to whatever exercise was giving me.
Hmm.
So then later on, I had kind of like a more rational understanding. I worked with a coach. I understood theoretically this need to accept as a decline in fitness to allow yourself to rest, but I would just do something else instead. So I might take a week or two off training, but then I'd do some social workouts with friends and I'd launch myself into another big project that wasn't like physically restful at all, some kind of
Hmm.
renovation work. And this, I would say, the last 2 years are the first time where I actually accepted taking some more time off. And this year was the first year where I truly just sat on my ass for a couple weeks of that break.
Hmm.
And that gives you a different level of rest than doing anything else. Like I started to be able to sleep without sleeping pills. I started to be able to I just could feel my amped up nervous system unwinding.
Hmm.
A lot of things changed.
So, I mean, you probably intellectually knew that you needed to rest, but you didn't. Can you kind of walk me through why?
Man, there's my life's been an exercise in cognitive dissonance at times, and that's a great example of it. I think one of the biggest challenges of self coaching is that like I'm a student of the sport. I have a pretty good analytical understanding of what I should be doing, but that does not always translate into what I'm actually doing. There's often a big disconnect, and rest was probably the best example of that. So I understood I needed this downtime, but I wasn't taking it really up until last year, and truly it was too little, too late until finally this big break I took this year.
Mhm. And, I mean, you can wave off this question for sure. It's, I mean, what you're basically describing is, a real pattern of denial.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, like, if you have looked at that and sort of wondered about like where does that come from and how else does it show up in your life? And I'm already off my question script because I'm interested.
Hey, I love going off script. Um, yeah, I think like I'm a pretty compulsive person. This is something a lot of other endurance athletes can relate to, and I channeled that a lot into exercise. Like that was not even borderline addiction. Like there's been addictive tendencies with exercise, and I'm aware of that to the point like there's a lot of substances I would completely stay away from because I realize I'm very predisposed to going headlong into things.
Mhm.
And yeah, so there definitely was some denial about the extent of the addiction to exercise.
And how are you addressing it? I mean, it's when you quit, when you have an addiction that is actively destroying your life, like alcohol or something like that, you have to stop.
Hmm.
But, there's plenty of other things, if we're talking about an eating disorder, that's usually an addiction to control.
Yep.
You can't stop eating. And, in your case, like this is your livelihood and you still are making a living doing it. And so you can't really like go sober from endurance sports. So how do you walk that line then?
The comparison to eating is actually a really apt one because that's also something I struggled with. Probably
Hmm.
something that was never diagnosed, but certainly cleared the bar to a clinical eating disorder. And I've also had people very close to me wrestle with devastating eating disorders that ended promising athletic careers. So I know a fair bit about that. And that was a way I exerted control for a long time up until my mid 20s, I would say. It took
Hmm.
years to normalize that relationship with food. But with respect to exercise, part of me wondered for a long time once I became a pro triathlete, like, had I just found this societally acceptable way to channel something that would have otherwise been really problematic into something that was being celebrated and making me money? Was that a
Hmm.
good thing? I don't know. It's complicated. I have no regrets over becoming a pro triathlete. It's been a wonderful adventure. Has it always been the best thing for my physical and mental health? I don't know. That's what I was getting at in that post. Sometimes it's been a positive force for many years. It helped me get the confidence to come out. It helped me overcome relative energy deficiency in sport because you can't be a world class pro when your health is in the toilet. But at times it's also felt pretty damn self-abusive too.
Mhm. Yeah, I hear you for sure. One thing I bet you wrestled with as you were dealing with the feelings around Chattanooga, and I think this is something that a lot of athletes struggle with, is what's the difference between like acute fatigue, which might be like a really hard workout or a very difficult training week, versus a more sort of longer term chronic fatigue, where it might be like, like a training block, which you're sort of like, well, yeah, you got to have some training blocks that are long and make you really tired. But then there's like a line. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience of fatigue and how you can separate what is fatigue that is necessary to get better and what is fatigue that is taking you in the direction of, all the things that you were feeling on October 1st.
Man, Chris, if I had a way to quantify that or a tidy answer to your question, I could make an app that would make me millions, I think. There's people have been trying to quantify fatigue and readiness to train and measure and manage all that for a long time. And I don't have a really good answer. The truth is, yeah, to be good at endurance sports and triathlon, sometimes you do have to push yourself really hard to a point that past the point that feels right. But I think I've learned like I don't need to train nearly as hard as I expected I did for
Mhm.
most of my career. Like going back during this break and analyzing some training data, I won all my Ironmans averaging less than 20 hours a week of training. Like my best Ironman in my career probably averaged 17 hours a week in the 8 weeks leading up to it. It's a lot of training by any measure, but it's not the 30-hour a week dick measuring contest you see other pro triathletes putting up all over Instagram?
Mhm.
So I still don't have a great answer to your question, to be honest, Chris. Like, sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm deeply tired, and the line between those is hard to grasp. I think one thing I will add is that to gauge that, I've leaned a lot more into qualitative metrics than quantitative ones. Earlier in my career, I was like Mr. Spreadsheet, Mr. Data. I tried all kinds of things, HRV. I would look at training stress balance, all sorts of stuff like that. And I've kind of come full circle to arriving back at like, how's my mood? How's my sleep? How's my sex drive? Just some
Mhm.
fundamental things that I think give me a better picture than any metric I've ever looked at.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some of the like flashing lights for you? Like when you're like, oh, okay, when this feeling comes up in my body or that sort of thing, like what are some of the big ones that tell you it's time to start backing off?
Okay, I've got four. I've actually been thinking about this because I want to do a post on this. I've
Nice.
touched on it in the past, but I really like consolidated my thoughts on this. So it's a good question. I think one of the best ones, so straightforward, but so often ignored. Am I actually motivated to train? Like, it's not always going to be easy to get out the door, but for more than half my sessions, do I actually feel like doing them? Do I have some excitement around that? And that is such a simple, but such a good indicator of readiness to train and fatigue for me. How's my mood? That's also a really important one. It's not always the case, but if I'm feeling kind of down, often I'm training too much or not eating enough. That's the explanation more than half the time for me. Sleep has also been a really good barometer for me, I find, specifically like waking up in the middle of the night. Like if I'm waking up wide awake at 2 or 3 a.m., that to me is perhaps an indicator that my endocrine system is not super well. So that's
Mhm.
one that I've looked at, like sleep quality and amount, specifically the early morning wake ups when I'm waking up. And the last one I think is sex drive, which is probably a really good thing that captures a lot of like endocrine health and specifically for guys, like consistency of morning wood. I think that's actually there's been a discussion about this on social media. Like Lionel talked a lot about this in the past. Yeah, they got some other guys talking about it. I'm not convinced that there's a better metric than that for some men at least.
Oh boy, I can't imagine triathletes taking this data point and running with it.
Look, if people can talk about shitting themselves in their race reports, then we can talk about other, bodily functions too, I think,
Oh
without
yeah,
being
I'm
embarrassed.
all down to talk about morning wood. I'm worried about triathletes' propensity to try to turn everything into an objective or measurable. I'm afraid there's gonna be a lot of bedside rulers out
Yeah, yeah.
there.
Hey, maybe you have an idea for a device or something like that. That could be a get rich quick scheme,
I think it's already been created. I think it is
probably.
already out there. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about this year, now that you've been like looking about this and thinking about this, when was the last time this year that you felt excited and motivated to train and race?
It wasn't this year until this week. This is my first week back into real training, and it's actually there's been joy in it that I realized I hadn't felt for many, many months. So
Hmm.
this was a really challenging year, even though I was healthy for the most part. The year before, though, I had a parasite that was had treatment failures 3 times, 3 different cocktails of medications that didn't work, um, and so that defined my whole season. And yeah, so I think we'd have to go all the way back to 2023 to find a time where I felt joyful and excited to be training.
Mhm. And what does that look like for you? Like, how do you know that you are feeling those feelings? Like, tell me, just describe it to me a little bit.
Like, look, it's training is going to be hard sometimes. I'd be lying to say I'm always exploding out the door with a smile on my face. But I talked to Sebastian Kienle about this. I was lucky enough to be at his retirement race in Cozumel a few years ago, and we had like a real good chat after the race. He'd had a great race. I had kind of a crappy one. It was probably the first race where I was sick. And his his thing that he looked at was 51% of his sessions had to have some fun in them, had to find some joy. So more
Mm,
than half. So there's an acceptance that yeah, by and large it's going to be challenging, but the majority can't be, you know? So I don't put that in a spreadsheet or anything like that, but I can tell when more than half my sessions are miserable. I think another good indicator for me is that I'm excited to make plans about my training, you know? Like I've just got a bike coach finally after years of self-coaching. I'm lining up all kinds of social training sessions the week ahead. In the past, I was kind of so miserable with training at times that I didn't want to think beyond the day that I was in, you know?
mhm.
Next week's training was going to be future me problem.
Yeah, that you sort of end up in this place where you're like, I don't want to reach out to anybody to ride. And then when it's time to ride, you're just like, okay, I'll just go ride alone again, and
Yeah.
yeah. And then of course, like that's just a snowball effect because then you're out riding alone, and riding alone has its benefits. Like you don't have to wait for anybody. Nobody's late. Nobody gets flat tires. But it's pretty solitary and it's a lot less
Yeah.
fun. What, I mean, now that you've sort of taken this break, like, do you see other triathletes, professional or amateur, sort of like making the same mistakes that you feel like you were making?
Hell yeah. Everywhere. Especially with respect to something like relative energy deficiency in sport. I can just see people who are putting up red flag after red flag. You know, I would never call anyone out, but I've definitely talked to people who are earlier in that journey than I was. And I think social media has amplified some of these problems because, you know, everyone's putting the best version of themselves out there, a very filtered version of their sessions and their races. And it's really easy to get caught up chasing other people's training numbers, which is
Mhm.
something I think I was doing for the last couple of years, which probably contributed to me digging this hole.
Yeah, and then my follow-up question to that is what's going to be different? Like how are you going to take this and keep it in front of you, for the rest of this year as you're starting to get training again and then into 2026? Like how do you keep this real?
I think one of the most fundamental things has to be a mindset shift. Like that post you read earlier, I was so caught up chasing that storybook ending that it came at the expense of relishing the process, you know? And it's a cliche, but I really want to get back to being more in the moment and not getting so hung up on outcomes and results.
Mhm.
That's not to say I'm not going to train hard and set myself up for my best possible performances, but really make an effort to be a lot more present, enjoy the process a lot more. I'm also making like some more concrete changes. Like I'm working with a bike coach now, Jackson Laundry, who's one of the best cyclists in 70.3, my main training partner for a decade. He's the man for the job. I'm just about to hire someone to help me with social media. I've had a pretty mixed relationship with social media. It's a fundamental part of the job these days. It's a big part of how we get paid as pro triathletes. I pretty much hate the attention most of the time, and I'd be happy to hand a portion of that off. I'm still working with my manager, Steph Corker, who you know as well.
Mhm.
She's really helped steer the ship in so many ways. She's rescued my career more times than I can count. And yeah, so a number of changes, both abstract and concrete, I think.
I think people really struggle with that process versus outcome thing. I am at a particular moment in my life when I have been focusing way too much on outcome, on just like, how do I make this business work? How do I, like all of that stuff? How do I blank? How do I do this? And it really it's very enervating. It really kind of empties you out. What does it look like for you when you're being in the moment and focusing on process?
Well, this is a new chapter I'm trying to start, so maybe I'll have to get back to you on that one. But I've definitely had earlier experiences in my life where I've been too hung up on the outcome. I
Hmm.
suffered through an entire 4-year degree that was the most miserable period of my life, hanging all my hope on this expectation that when I graduated, I would suddenly feel better. And I
Hmm.
vividly remember like walking out of my last exam of my undergrad into a rainy drizzle, very pathetic fallacy, and nothing was different. Nothing changed. There was no great weight lifted off my shoulders, but still the same me wrestling with the same problems. So I've tried to bring that lesson forward, not very well sometimes,
Hmm.
that like I can't hang my hopes that when something happens or I achieve this, that things will be different. By and large, they're not. I kind of still come back to the same set point of happiness or misery.
Have you had that same experience after like a good result? Have you sort of had a great result and then kind of like walked away and been like, that didn't make me happy at all?
It's never not made me happy. Like winning is really thrilling. It's intoxicating. But like I've done it 12 times as a pro. It's the 12th one wasn't as sweet as the first, you know?
Mm,
It's not going to carry you through the challenge that this career is every single day. So, one of my ground rules that I aim for at least is no matter how a race goes, awful or great, I try and get over it within preferably 24 hours, but ideally a week, because I do a lot better when I have stability in my life and riding some big high or some big low. I think they're two sides of the same coin. If you allow yourself to get completely thrilled off your socks about a win, that same version of you is going to be in a deep depression if you have a shit result. I
mhm.
think they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're sort of continuing to talk about. I mean, it's the same. It's still the outcome thing. It's like if we hang all of our. I mean, if you take this over to like a dating perspective, there's this great quote: "If you make somebody your emotional home, they can evict you at any time."
Oh, I love that.
I know it's great, right? But it's sort of like if you make your results your emotional home,
Mm,
it's not something you're in control of. You've had amazing races where four of you have been running to the finish line together, and all four of you are having an amazing race. But somebody ends up fourth. Somebody gets
hmm
the wooden medal.
Yep,
And like
I've been there.
that, and it's like that can't the result really can't be the thing then, right?
No, but it's really hard to hold this duality. I've talked about this a lot with Jackson, my training partner. Like you have to hold this duality simultaneously that you care so much about the result that you're willing to bury yourself for it. But if it doesn't come together, whatever, it's just triathlon. It's a stupid made up sport. I didn't need that. How do you hold these two things at the same time? Really tough.
How do you do that?
Not very well sometimes, Chris. Yeah, of course I react. Like racing is a very emotional process. And I
Hmm.
think earlier in my career, in my life, I aspired to be like emotionally neutered about everything. I thought that was like the ideal version of me, stoic,
Hmm.
robotic, just execute, no big feelings. And that's not ideal. That's not a recipe to be happy in life. So I have this acceptance now that racing is this big catharsis. Like the way we race as Ironman athletes, we don't race too often. It's like a punctuation mark at the end of a training block, and then things change. You're awash with emotions. I've accepted that after a race, I'm not going to be my usual fairly stable self for like at least a week, sometimes
Hmm.
longer after Ironman. It perturbs your body in a lot of ways, both physical and psychological.
How does emotions show up for you in training and racing? Could you just kind of describe? You've described there was one way you were doing it, which was basically to deny them.
hmm
And I'd love to hear about what that felt like. But before we get to that, let's talk more about when it's working. Like when you feel like you're in a good place racing and training wise, how do emotions appear to you and what does that feel like?
The right amount of anxiety, which I've been thinking a lot about lately because anxiety has been like a big defining force in my life over the last many years. And I think some amount of it is actually optimal. And especially for triathlon, to me, it's a sign that I care, that I'm still really deeply invested in this process. So I try and tell myself that. But there's also times where anxiety's kind of run rampant and been extremely debilitating. And I've been thinking a lot about this recently because some friends who are pretty similar to me, a couple have gone on anti-anxiety meds, and it makes me wonder. Like it's been a really positive thing for them. It's been great. I'm glad those exist for the people that need them. And I wondered, like, is there some substance I could take like that would be life changing? But at the same time, would that take away like this driving impetus in my life that got me top of my class and launched my career as a pro triathlete and got me wins? So it's kind of a double-edged sword, man. Like sometimes it's really tough, but I also feel like I've by and large found a way to channel anxiety in a positive way.
Mhm. And when you do that, like what does it look like? What does it feel like?
I'm still able to sleep at night if I'm managing it well, I would say.
Hmm.
And I'm not letting triathlon become the absolute centerpiece of my life in every way. I'm not allowing my entire identity to be wrapped up in it. That's also been really important to me.
Do you do anything kind of as you approach a race to hit that? Have you found a way to manage that anxiety, to like let it be, oh, this is too much, I need to bring it down. Oh, I'm not feeling enough, I need to bring it up. Are there tactics that you use to adjust that?
Yeah, I really try and clear my schedule for, that's embarrassing, but probably a couple weeks leading into races. Like other athletes, I'm in awe of the bandwidth they have leading into races. I
Mhm.
get so easily overstimulated. Like if I have a couple of things on my schedule in race week, I kind of freak out. So I minimize commitments completely. I don't schedule anything before noon. And again, like this is embarrassing to admit. Like I feel like in other jobs, I'd be a 9 to 5, I'd be so dysfunctional like that. But I like if I'm going to do a race, that's all I can really handle for a couple weeks. And as a result, I don't really race casually. Most of the racing I do, I'm there to try and perform as
Mhm.
well as I can. So that's one way I've managed to stay focused, not get too anxious, maintain the right amount of anxiety to perform.
And then, going back to that stoicism that you employed early on, when did you discover that didn't work?
Around the same time, maybe this is not so coincidental, but around the same time when I came out and got into my relationship with my partner 10 years ago. So as a 25-year-old. And I think that was largely wrapped up altogether because I had just shut down my emotions for so long, no, no dating life, no social life, nothing, no Mr. No emotions. So I told myself at least. And
Mhm.
then yeah, I accepted all that and not all at once, but a lot of things. There was a cascade of changes that happened around that time that were really positive. It was like I crammed what should have been the last 10 years of personal and social development into it felt like 2 or 3 instead,
Oh God.
maybe I'm still catching up. And that also coincided with like my triathlon career taking off and really hitting another level and getting my first professional wins. So um, yeah, I don't think you can be the best version of yourself on the race course if you're not coming from a good place of mental health and self-confidence.
Mhm. When it is going well, when you are training and racing, like with positive emotions, like what, because anxiety is an interesting one.
Hmm.
I feel like anxiety and excitement are the exact same thing. They're both
Yeah.
something's going to happen, I don't know what. And
Yep.
we put like a negative spin on anxiety and a positive spin on excitement.
Hmm.
But other than those two, like when you're sort of at your best, do you feel other emotions when you're training and racing?
Yeah, I find it's a lot easier to slip into a flow state,
Hmm.
And if there's one feeling that keeps me coming back to sports, it's that feeling. And we all know it as athletes. And it's infuriatingly hard to reach. It's unpredictable. Sometimes
Hmm.
I'll go weeks of training or months of racing without really getting into that perfect flow state. Other times I'll have a week of sessions where I'm hitting it almost every single day, the right
Hmm.
cocktail of training and music and company. Yeah, that's pretty powerfully addictive. And that's a
Hmm.
good sign that things are trending well if I'm slipping into that with ease and not grasping for it.
Flow state's always hard, like you just said, it's so elusive. And all we can ever really do is kind of like mimic the conditions that got us
Hmm.
there last time.
Yep.
What are the conditions that you find have the highest probability of moving you into that flow state?
Indoor training, controversial, but I can control the environment a lot more. Like I said,
Hmm.
really easily overstimulated, like probably falling somewhere on the spectrum like most people. And I've learned more about that and realized like I think that's why I really don't like riding outside. It's just so overstimulating.
Hmm.
So riding indoors right here with bike behind me, music. I know we have bonded before over music. Music is like the most surefire way to get me to a flow state. I also realized it's a crutch. So my personal rule of thumb is no music outside. I still do
Hmm.
most of my training outside, at least most of my running. No outdoor music, but inside, whatever the heck I feel like. And specifically, this is probably a little out there, but like looping the same song, that can really pull you
Yep.
into that state. I don't something about it. I don't know. It just like wears a groove in your brain, scratches some itch. And yeah, I would say those are the two biggest factors for me. And the right intensity too,
Hmm.
which is a moving target.
What has your emotional landscape been like during racing this year and last year?
Yeah, not great, Chris. I've always prided myself in being pretty good once the gun goes off, and uncharacteristically this year I just had some races where I kind of crumbled, and like had a higher DNF rate. I had more DNFs in the last couple years than the rest of my career combined, I think, because I was already on such tenuous ground coming into the race that whether I accepted it or not, once one thing went south in the race, I just was going to roll over. I had no capacity to deal with it. Or in the past, like the last Ironman I won, Lake Placid, like I shouldn't have won that race. So much stuff went wrong, but I just kind of kept having the mentality like, hey, let's problem solve this, you know? It's an 8-hour race. Something's going to go wrong. Yeah, so you just have to learn to roll with that. I was not doing that very well this year at all.
Mhm. And what do you think contributed to that? Was it just overall fatigue? Was it the GI bug? Was it just a high level of burnout? Like, what do you think took you away from that problem solving mentality into a place where DNF was probable?
Hmm. Um, I think it was a combination of factors, all the ones you touched on for sure. I think certainly laid the groundwork by not resting very well, and that was finally catching up with me. There was a slow pattern of that becoming more and more problematic. I'm also getting older as an athlete, so speaking of moving targets, things are changing, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and then yeah, the GI bug last year was the it was just the icing on the cake, I think. And that there's some interesting research on that, like even being fully cured for more than a year now. Um, we're still learning about gut health, and it takes a lot of time for the effects of that to unwind. So it's not uncommon for people to have. I don't want to use the word chronic fatigue because it's such a nebulous term, but that's a very common after effect of situations like that, especially when they persist as long as mine did. So combination of factors.
A lot of people, obviously, we do a lot of physical training. That's a given. Most athletes will do some sort of mental skills training, visualization, energy management, goal setting, all that stuff. But it's very thinky. Do you ever do any like intentional emotional training?
No, called out. Not that I can think of right now. I don't know if you're counting visualization, but that's definitely something I try and practice, especially at the end of long sessions, which takes some effort to feels like flexing your mind, you know, when you're tired to
Mhm.
visualize, moments in a race, performances. But I don't know if that qualifies as emotional training. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's such an odd. I ask it more out of like, what would that even look like? I mean, it's definitely something that I'm really interested in, and I talk with a lot of my athletes about. So it's a lot of questions of like, okay, what were you feeling when blank? And of
Hmm.
course,
Hmm.
like, generally the first answer you get is, well, I felt really tired. I'm like, well,
Hmm.
okay, that's not an emotion. Let's, let's get the emotion wheel out and, start there, so sort of the mad, sad, glad, afraid, ashamed. And
Hmm.
then kind of work down from there, like what did you feel when you were doing this track interval, or what were you feeling when you were doing in the middle of this race. But I don't think it's something that I don't know if it's anything that's really codified yet. I don't know if it's a thing that people are doing a lot of. Like it feels nebulous to me too. Like what would it even
Hmm.
look like?
My first thought was that feels very avant-garde as a coach that you're asking your athletes that. And we both know that coaching is so much more than just program writing. And I think what you're getting at is a key piece that's missing from a lot of coaching. Like, look, a coach can't be your best friend and your therapist and your shoulder to cry on. That's too much to ask. But
Hmm.
to coach an athlete the most effective way possible, you certainly have to have an understanding of their emotional state too. Would you agree?
Oh my God, absolutely. Yeah. And everybody is different, like, the way that I would talk to you differently than, another athlete because
Hmm.
like you're different and you're unique. But I think I started thinking about that when I heard Alexander Buh talking about like the two things he does with athletes is convert carbohydrates to speed. And I was like, oh my God, I love that. And then optimizing for joy. And, here we're talking about, the Norwegians, which are known for this really like very objective kind of thing, but all of them grow up not specializing. Like Norwegian athletes tend to not specialize until they're 16.
Hmm.
And they're mostly just gamers, they just get out there and play. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about that and just being like, I think that this is like not, this is a stone that's not being overturned. And you're one of the more emotionally intelligent triathletes that I know. So I wanted to talk to you about it and sort of see what your emotional landscape is like when you train and race.
Yeah, I really do think you're onto something there with asking those questions to your athletes, and you're certainly giving me something to think about too, you know? And that's what keeps me coming back to the sport, man. It's such a
Mhm.
puzzle. Like here I am 12 years into this career, which has been fairly successful any way you look at it, and still like completely humbled this fall. What the hell do I know about any of this?
Yeah. Well, what is new coming up for this year? So you have a cycling coach, something that you haven't done for a bit. What are some of the different approaches that you are going to take in the hopes of a different process? We're not going to say outcome, a different
Yeah.
process in 2026.
Not measure that last act based on just what the results are, which is something I wrote in that post you read at the top of the episode. Look, I sure hope next year goes better. I think this year was a pretty low bar that I can beat, but even if I have an equally shitty year, I think I'll have a different outlook on it. That's the intention I'm setting at least. And I'm also not going to over race like I did this year. I mean, I didn't do too many races, but I started 4 Ironmans on 4 different continents. I don't do well with travel. I find travel so profoundly dysregulating. Maybe that's a weird career choice to not love travel and be a pro triathlete. But I'm going to race less and I'm going to race more locally. I feel
Mhm.
way more excited about a race I can hop in my car and drive to than getting on an international flight and completely perturbing myself with time zones and everything. So those are two big changes right there, I think.
That's something that, I don't know if you've ever talked to Gordo Byrne or followed any of his stuff, but
A little
he
bit.
found as he progressed and got older that it became much more stay to train, stay to race. When
Hmm.
he was younger, he flew all over the place and, raced all over the globe, but then began to realize, like, as your life gets more complicated as we age, and things happen, you add partners, you add jobs, like things
Hmm.
occur, that he found more and more success doing exactly the thing you're talking about, which is like,
That's
nope,
really interesting. Yeah.
not going to go to that huge camp in Austria. I'm going to stay here and, stay
Yep.
home and train, that sort of thing, and race at home. Yeah. So I think that sounds positive, because we get more tired. Like when I turned 36, there was a like profound difference.
Yeah.
And then, it was sort of like, okay, I can't race as much as I used to.
And the flip side of that, though, is that I find like my baseline fitness is higher than ever. Like
Mm,
I'm 1 week back into training and I could race an okay Ironman tomorrow, even after 7 weeks mostly off or really easy. Like just the baseline level I maintain is so much higher. I can't train as much as I used to. I can't recover like I used to already, but I don't need to anymore either. I remember hearing Craig Alexander talk about that later in his career when he was still crushing it.
yeah.
And it's pretty empowering to accept that. And it's kind of nice. Like I don't have to chase these huge training weeks anymore. I think if everything goes perfectly this year, I can deliver world-class Ironmans off like 15 to 20 hours a week
Mhm.
for the most part.
How do you know that the level is there? What are you looking at in this week of training where you're like, "Oh, I'm fine."
I mean, you don't. There are no guarantees in sport, and next week I could be painting a
Uh-huh.
different picture entirely. But like I think it's an interesting metric. What's a good sprint look like in the pool? Can I just hop in and deliver a nice crisp 25 or 50 or 100 or something like that? That
Mhm.
captures a lot of things about not just where your fitness is at, but where your nervous system's at, because it's not how we race, obviously.
Mhm.
But I worked with a coach I respect a lot, Tim Floyd, in Texas in the past. He has a program there called Magnolia Masters, and one of the metrics he was really big on was a 4x100 descend 1 to 4 at the top of every swim, pretty much. And I still do that sometimes. I think you gain a lot of useful, actionable insight from that. Can you actually descend the hundreds? What is the first one at? What is the last one at? Do they descend sequentially by how much? It's a lot of info there you can get, and it's an exercise that encompasses like a lot of different factors, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, those test sets are great, because it's something repeatable that you can
Uh-huh.
kind of point to and track over time.
Hmm.
It's basically like a little efficiency factor thing where you can be
Yep.
like, "Oh, okay, this felt like 6 out of 10. I descended all of them. These were
Hmm.
my times." And you can look at it over the course of, and 4 by 100 is not 10 by 400.
No.
It's not like one of
Yeah.
those where you're just like, I don't know if I want to do that. That's a really great idea. I love that.
Yeah, or I do it even simpler sometimes, like just bang out a fast 25, comfortably
Hmm.
fast, like 90% effort. And what time do I hit on that roughly? Round it to the nearest second.
Hmm.
Is it an effortful 14? Is it an easy 13? Is it there's a lot of info I can get just from that alone.
Well, I have exhausted my questions as always, but we always tend to go deep, which is great. Where can people find you, follow you, and see how you're doing through this winter and into next season?
If I don't give up on social media entirely, you can find me at Cody.Beals on Instagram. Got a website too. Thanks a lot for the chat, Chris. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, man, this is awesome. We should do this again sometime next year and see how the process is going.
Yeah, I know. I have no doubt we'll have a lot to talk about.
Awesome. Well, Cody, thank you so much. This is always such a pleasure, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.